This audio recording and PowerPoint presentation is in support of the G. Lawrence Rarick Memorial Lecture given by Dr. Robert Daniel Steadward, Professor Emeritus, University of Alberta, Edmonton, Canada, and founder of the Steadward Centre. This keynote opening address was presented at the 25th ISAPA Symposium on Monday, June 16th, 2025, under the patronage of UNESCO and hosted by Munster Technological University in Tralee, County Kerry, Ireland. Slide number 1. G. Lawrence Rarick Memorial Lecture. Good afternoon, colleagues, friends, and family. I am personally overwhelmed with the honor you have bestowed upon me by conferring the G. Lawrence Rarick Memorial Lecture. It is with immense pride and profound humility that I accept this special recognition, and I cannot express in words my feelings of gratitude for this opportunity to speak with you. But to be deemed worthy of this distinguished recognition is to pay homage to the volunteer architects of the adapted physical activity field of study, the Paralympic movement, and to the thousands of Paralympians worldwide, along with my extended family and friends. These die-hard advocates have demonstrated their unwavering encouragement, love, and support for me during my years of endeavor that has culminated in the advancement and overwhelming success of programs and opportunities for people living with a disability worldwide, and what has become the third largest sporting movement in the world today. But today was preceded by uncountable yesterdays, going back to 1989 when, as the founding president of the newly created International Paralympic Committee, and an executive council formed by many visionaries around the globe, would join in the struggle for equal opportunities for athletes living with a disability to compete on the world stage along with their Olympian counterparts. Slide number 2, my Paralympic journey. In this presentation, I would like to share with you my perspective on the origins and transformation of the Paralympic movement from over the past 58 years of my personal involvement. The president of the International Paralympic Committee, Andrew Parsons, recently said, "The Paralympic Games are the most transformational sport event on earth. Wherever the event is held, it triggers immense change, impacting infrastructure, policies, and most importantly, lives. So please remember and think about the power of Paralympic sport and the lessons learned. My belief is that Paralympic sport can and will change society. We will learn the universal shared values of teamwork, discipline, fair play, and respect. We will unite people globally from all languages and all cultures. We will promote inclusion, equality, and we will be a force for peace. We will ensure integrity. We will inspire imagination, and we will learn from adversity, failure, and perseverance. Slide number 3, in the beginning. Today, I will take you on a journey that is more than 80 years old. During World War II, from 1939 to 1945, many, many wounded soldiers returned home from the war to the United Kingdom, Canada, USA, Europe, and other countries around the world. They were treated in rehab hospitals and were primarily patients with spinal cord injury, amputations, and traumatic brain injury. Their lives were forever shortened because of septic infection and other complications due to their injuries. So modern methods of rehabilitation were needed to be developed to make a difference in their quality of life. Physical activities and recreation programs in the hospitals and rehab centers were provided by doctors and nurses. This helped with independence as well as skill development. It also became a form of rehabilitation to prevent boredom in the hospital. Nothing magical about it, only practical. In 1944, Dr. Ludwig Guttmann was invited by the British government to open a spinal injury center at the Stoke Mandeville Hospital in Aylesbury, England. In 1945, in Canada, the Deer Lodge Rehab Hospital held many sporting event competitions for their wounded soldiers. They developed 9 teams of 8 and competed in 6 different sports. In 1948, the Stoke Mandeville Hospital, under the leadership of Dr. Guttmann, developed friendly games among a few patients in the hospital. Then, in 1952, the International Stoke Mandeville Games was created at the Stoke Mandeville Hospital when Dutch ex-servicemen joined the movement. There were many limitations to the creation of the International Stoke Mandeville Games Federation. It was a local hospital committee or organization, not a democratic international organization. No countries or athletes had voting privileges. Only summer sports were organized. The International Stoke Mandeville Games were planned to be held on an annual basis at Stoke Mandeville, but only spinal cord injured patients were allowed to participate using a wheelchair. No amputees, polio, cerebral palsy, and intellectually disabled were permitted to participate. Canada sent a wheelchair basketball team to Stoke Mandeville Games in 1953, but had to play netball as they had no wheelchair basketball teams or equipment available. Accommodation at the Stoke Mandeville Hospital for the annual games were housed in a World War II military patient building, and meals were TV dinners served by incarcerated prisoners on the grounds of Stoke Mandeville Hospital. The sport competition facilities were of a very poor standard. No athletics was built until 1975, and therefore there was no track for wheelchair racing. At this point in time, other countries were already integrating their disabled athletes within the community as well as in national sport organizations using high-performance sport facilities. Post-World War II, in the years following the Second World War, a global explosion was happening. Therefore, more primary care hospitals and rehabilitation facilities and centers were badly needed. There was a rapid worldwide industrial development taking place, which unfortunately caused many accidents because of poor working conditions and environments and unsafe equipment. There was a great explosion of birth rates immediately following the Second World War. Then we experienced a worldwide polio epidemic in 1952, which led to much paralysis. Thalidomide medication in 1957 was introduced, which led to many congenital amputations. Motor vehicle accidents increased because of the increased number of vehicles post-World War II and the speeds at which these vehicles were achieving. There were also many medical breakthroughs and surgical advancements, resulting in disabilities such as cerebral palsy and spina bifida. Although sports like wheelchair basketball, track and field, table tennis, volleyball, and the like grew out of some of these rehab centers from around the world and into the community, access to sport facilities was nearly impossible because of physical barriers. The community was just not ready to accept people living with a disability in physical barriers in sporting facilities. And no trained coaches were available to athletes after the Second World War and into the 50s. But we were fortunate that there was a burgeoning of worldwide distinguished adapted physical activity leaders and professors at our universities that provided leadership, prepared students for the field of adapted physical activity, and conducted state-of-the-art research. Many of these professionals were our original pioneer leaders and award recipients within International Federation of Adapted Physical Activity, ISAPA. This included friends and colleagues like Pat Austin, Tim Nugent, Julian Stein, Claremont Simard, Inga Morisbach, Ted Wall, Claudine Sherrill, Karen DePaul, Greg Reed, Herman Van Copenoli, Polly Rentali, Shika Hitzler, and many others, including Gudrun Dahltepper. Perhaps they became involved because they had a family member who was living with a disability, or they worked for a charity, or they were volunteer coaches. Unfortunately, much of the adapted physical activity curriculum taught at universities at the time was not integrated into the basic content of other academic subjects. In fact, much of it has remained segregated to this very day. That was then, and this is now. All of you, as adapted physical activity specialists, are carrying the torch and are responsible for making a difference. You cannot let up. It is your willingness to use your talents and influence to change attitudes, combat discrimination, and foster support that reminds us that life's greatest rewards comes from focusing less on ourselves and more on helping people living with a disability to learn, grow, and succeed at achieving their goals and aspirations. Slide number 4. Initial growth, 1960 to 1980. In 1960 and 1964, the International Stoke Mandeville Summer Games for the very first time were held in the Olympic cities of Rome and Tokyo, and not at Stoke Mandeville Hospital in Aylesbury. They were not held in another Olympic city again until 1988. And still, only athletes with spinal cord injury were allowed to compete until 1976, when amputees and visually impaired athletes were introduced to the Games. Then 4 years later, in 1980, athletes with cerebral palsy were introduced as part of the family at the Games in Arnhem, the Netherlands. In 1976, the first International Winter Games for Disabled were held in Sweden. This event was structured by sport, Nordic and Alpine, not disability, and they were sanctioned by ISOD, not ISMGF, or the International Stoke Mandeville Games Federation. Over these years, from 1960 to 1980, many countries felt that the Summer Games were held back because of the medical influence and overprotection of the international federations. Unfortunately, participants were still considered patients and not athletes. For example, because of the concern of the altitude in Mexico City in 1968, the Games were moved to Israel. Track racing was limited to a maximum of 100 meters, and in swimming, they were limited to 50 meters, even though other countries competing around the world were competing in longer distances and more events. The slalom event, of course, was popular at the time because of its practicality of moving around the community with all of its barriers. And as I said earlier, the events were held in rehabilitation centers and not community high-performance sport facilities. In fact, the names of the games were called and referred to as the International Stoke Mandeville Games or Olympics for Disabled, not Paralympics. And you can see in slide 4 the logos which illustrate the names of those games. Slide number 5. Other world sport organizations. Even though my presentation today is focusing on the Paralympic movement, I would be remiss if I did not pay tribute to 3 additional worldwide organizations who have provided opportunities in sport for other disabilities. In 1962, a professor at the University of Toronto, Dr. Frank Hayden, was conducting primary research on the role of the physical activity and movement skills for people with intellectual disability. In 1964, his research conceived the idea, along with a written detailed plan, of a foundation for sporting opportunities for intellectually disabled children and adults. Frank then moved to Washington, D.C. in 1965 at the invitation of the Kennedy Foundation to assist them with their summer camps. Special Olympics International was then created in 1968 by Dr. Frank Hayden when he organized the first Special Olympic Games in Chicago with the support of the Kennedy Foundation. More than 1,000 athletes participated in this event from around the United States and Canada. Today, more than 170 countries are members of Special Olympics International. Even before 1962, from 1947 through to the 70s, it was Professor Pat Austin from the University of Alberta in Edmonton, Canada, who was leading the support and opportunities for intellectually disabled children and adults. She worked alongside Dr. Hayden for many years leading up to the creation of the Special Olympics International. Prior to Special Olympics International, the International Silent Games, now known as the Deaflympics since 2001, were held for the very first time in Paris in 1924 and included 9 European countries. These were the first games ever for any group of disability. And today, CIS, the International Association for Deaf Sport, has 116 national members. And one of the leaders through my time as president was Jerry Jordan from Gallaudet University in Washington, USA. And he led this organization so gallantly for so many years. The Invictus Games were established in 2014 for military veterans and service personnel under the motto, I Am. This was accomplished through the efforts of Prince Harry, Duke of Sussex, after he witnessed the Warrior Games in 2013 in the USA. The first Invictus Summer Games were held in London, UK in 2014. About 20 nations participated in 12 different summer sports. The first Invictus Winter Games were created in 2025 in Vancouver, Whistler, and included 5 sports. Slide number 6, Tumultuous Transitional Years, 1980 to 1989. This slide also shows activities around the Arnhem Seminar, the Seoul Games in 88, and the creation of IPC. And there will be separate slides talking about those 3 subcategories. Many world leaders describe these transitional years as turmoil, dysfunction, jealousies, tensions, overprotection, confusion, frustration, drama, and disappointment. Sadly, Sir Ludwig Guttmann, founder and president of the International Stoke Mandeville Games Federation, died in early 1980, prior to the Olympics for Disabled in Arnhem, the Netherlands. Following these games in 1980, an international fund of sport for disabled was created because of the huge financial success of the Arnhem Games. 2 years later, in 1982, a working group called the ICC, International Coordinating Committee was created by the 5 international organizations of sport for disabled: ISOD, ISMGF, IBSA, and CP-ISRA. World organizations for blind, cerebral palsy, and amputees had been created as separate world bodies prior to 1980. The President, Secretary General, and Technical Officer of each IOSD made up the membership of the ICC working group, 12 people. A president pro tem system was used, which meant rotating a president to serve the working committee every 6 months. Therefore, a great lack of leadership existed, as well as consistency. They met twice a year. No nations or athletes were involved as members. It became a non-democratic working committee. There was a lack of cooperation within the ICC. The 4 different ICC members kept fighting amongst themselves to preserve their independence, influence, and power. In 1983, the ICC held their very first joint meeting with the International Olympic Committee president. They were not allowed to use the word Olympic, but the IOC gave them permission to use the word Paralympic. But this word was never adopted until 1988. During this same meeting, the IOC approved demonstration supports for the 1984 Winter and Summer Olympic Games. And also during this meeting, South Korea in Seoul was approved as the site for the 1988 Games. 1984, the United States was committed to host the Olympics for disabled, but not in Los Angeles, who was the site for the 1984 Olympic Games. So where will they be held? Many different sites were considered. Eventually, the United States withdrew their contract to host the International Stoke Mandeville wheelchair section of the Games. I was asked to host the International Stoke Mandeville wheelchair section of the Games in Edmonton, Canada, but we would only have had 4 months in order to organize them. So no facilities and no organizing committee could be put in place in that short of time. So the ISMGF Games went back to Stoke Mandeville, and the other 3 disabilities stayed in New York, which meant the amputees, the blind, and the cerebral palsy had their competitions in New York. This was an exceptionally huge downturn in the history of our organization. These turbulent years further highlighted the pressing need for a unified framework in sports for disabled athletes. The fragmentation among the ICC members and the lack of cohesive global leadership hindered progress. Canada and other nations increasingly voiced their dissatisfaction with the inefficiencies, urging for more transparency, inclusivity, and the creation of a new world organization. A proposal was actually submitted by Canada to the ICC in 1983 and 1984 for their consideration, but it was ignored. Amid this growing international pressure, the ICC was forced to reconsider its approach, aiming to reconcile the interests of global pressure. By the end of 1984, discussions surrounding the inclusion of broader disability categories and the need for a centralized governing body intensified, setting the stage for pivotal changes in the years ahead. In 1985, pressure came from the International Olympic Committee to include deaf sports and ISAPA, which was the International Association of Sport for Mental Handicap, within the ICC Working Committee, because IOC would only recognize and work with one organization. In 1986, CIS, which is deaf sport, and ISFMH, which is International Sport for Mentally Handicapped, were then admitted as members to ICC. But Special Olympics International membership was refused. There were many reasons for this, but perhaps it was because ISFMH, Sport for Mentally Handicapped, was already a member of ICC. In 1987, there was so much pressure from nations around the world that the ICC agreed to hold a world seminar for March 12 to 15, 1987, in Arnhem, the Netherlands, to consider a new world organization. I will discuss this more in the next slide. In 1988, finally, the 4 original ICC members signed an agreement with each other after being together since 1982. And yet the ICC realized they would eventually disappear. In 1989, ISFMH, Mentally Handicapped Sport, wanted their games to be held in 1992 in Barcelona, along with the other Paralympic athletes. However, there was a lot of pushback from our Paralympics. They said no. They had to find their own date and location. Therefore, ISFMH moved their games to Madrid after the Barcelona Games, but under the ICC sanctioned. Between 1980 and 1989, around the world during the tumultuous ICC, many things were happening. Many of the sports globally were growing independent of ICC. Scientific researchers like Horst Strokendahl from Germany was developing a wheelchair basketball functional classification system. Many sports were integrating with able-bodied sport programs both nationally and internationally. Trained professional coaches were being developed worldwide, and many nations were creating federations where all disabilities and all sports came under one organization. Slide number 7, Arnhem Seminar, March 12 to 15, 1987. This is our first milestone in our recent history. This was the start of the creation of the foundation pillars of our future new world body. 52 countries were present at this meeting and a total of 210 delegates. And each country had voting up to 6 votes, depending on the structure of their national federations. During the 2 or 3 days of meetings, there were 23 resolutions developed. The ICC members present at these meetings resisted. They were resistant to change. They were overprotective of their own disability group, and they had a fear of losing their independence, power, and influence. But the nations around the world that were present wanted to seize the opportunity to voice and change the existing status of the ICC, the International Coordinating Committee. The IFSD, International Federation of Sport for Disabled, agreed to financially support the Arnhem Seminar and remove their financial support from the ICC. Of the 23 resolutions, there were 7 that were key. Number 1, a change in structure was unanimously accepted. And this was accepted as a democratic organization for a legally constituted and fully representative single world organization. Number 2, there would be national, regional, and athlete representation on this new organization. Number 3, this new organization would look to reduce the number of classes that were currently involved. Number 4, that the creation of a functional classification system was insisted upon, not a medical system. Number 5, they wanted to ensure that the structure was by sport, not by disability. Number 6 is that we work towards integration with the international federations as well as the International Olympic Committee. And number 7 was to appoint an ad hoc working committee of 15 members, 6 regional representatives, 6 IOSDs, and 3 athletes. And their challenge and orders were to develop a constitution for this new organization and report back to the nations in Seoul, South Korea in 1988. Later, in the fall of 1987, following the Arnhem Seminar, I had an opportunity to meet personally with the IOC president, Samaranch, in Calgary. I shared our Arnhem ideas and resolutions, and as a result, he invited me to come to the Olympic Games in Seoul to present our new structure and governance proposal. Slide number 8, Modern Paralympic Games, 1988. This is our second major milestone in our recent history. During the 1988 Summer Olympic Games in Seoul, I met with President Samaranch to discuss our new draft organization, which had been circulated to member nations. It was very well received, and he was most pleased with our progress. A few weeks after the Seoul Olympic Games, the Seoul, South Korea, hosted the creation and beginning of our first modern Paralympic Games. These were the first games to receive significant commitment from the International Olympic Committee. In fact, the Paralympics began 2 weeks following the Olympics. There was a gradual shift in the disabled sports community from the medical rehabilitation model to sports as high performance. In prior years, they were known as the International Stoke Mandeville Games or the Olympics for Disabled. Remember that in 1983, the International Olympic Committee would not allow ICC to use the word Olympic. And because of the problems with the 1984 Games in the US, the word Paralympic was not used again until Seoul, South Korea in 1988 at the first modern Paralympic Games. These games were combined with the cooperative spirit and host organization of both the Olympics and the Paralympics. The same sport competition facilities for both the Olympic and Paralympic Games were used. They were not rehab centers. A new logo was created for the Games, which became the logo for the new organization the next year. The name changed in 1988 to become known as the 88 Seoul Paralympics. Professional coaches were evident with the teams, and national teams were integrated and aligned along sport, not disability. During these first modern Paralympic Games in 1988, the ad hoc working committee from the 1987 Arnhem Games Task Force presented their draft constitution for a new organization. Unfortunately, this was not the best time and place to hold the meeting. All of the national representatives also had team responsibilities for the Paralympics. The chairman of the meeting had a very difficult time controlling the delegates. Only one language was used, which was English. There were still difficulties with the ICC members resisting change. So eventually, I got the courage to stand up and convince the delegation that was meeting there to meet in 1 year's time in Düsseldorf, Germany. This was acceptable to all people present at the meeting, and therefore the meeting was adjourned. Slide number 9, Founding General Assembly, September 22nd, 1989. This is the third major milestone in our recent history. This meeting was held in Düsseldorf, Germany, from September the 21st to the 22nd, 1989. The atmosphere was very tense, with eager anticipation because of what happened a year prior in Seoul, South Korea, and with the anticipation of what is yet to come. The organizing committee, which was the German Paralympic Committee, felt that it was important to have a neutral chairman, and therefore a German judge by the name of Wolf Preising was invited to preside over the proceedings. Unfortunately, he had no knowledge of the Paralympic movement, so it was very difficult for him to manage that environment. However, we were able to resolve many of the basic issues over the 2 days. And there were some significant accomplishments. First of all, we agreed on a name for the new organization, that being International Paralympic Committee. Secondly, the members present elected a new executive committee, which included a president, 2 vice presidents, a secretary general, a treasurer, a technical officer, a medical officer, and 3 members at large. They were elected by the founding General Assembly. In addition to the executive committee, the rest of the board was made up of 6 regional members elected by regional members, 6 ICC members appointed by their IOSDs, and 1 athlete. During these meetings, the Constitution was not accepted, only the basic structure. But the newly elected IPC Executive Committee was requested to take the draft Constitution back to their meetings and bring back a fully edited Constitution and bylaws to the 1990 General Assembly in Groningen in the Netherlands. This meeting, the founding General Assembly in September 1989, was comprised of 42 countries and 203 delegates, in which 159 were eligible to vote. Slide number 10. My years as president, 1989 to 2001. At the beginning of the inaugural General Assembly in Dusseldorf, we were a mere fledgling caught within the superstructure of international sport. But we fought for our rights and our recognition. In fact, we did more. We adapted and we grew. The opportunities and challenges for my first 12 years was much different than what President Parsons is experiencing today. We had no money, we had no staff, we only had a name and an executive committee. But I remember from my youth that we had our collection of wooden building blocks to begin, which seemed like our lifelong process of leading and building. But whatever our challenges and opportunities happened to be, with sweat, blood, and yes, sometimes tears, we agonized over each and every block and rejoiced when hard work dedication, commitment, and perseverance to the task produced a great result. My primary goals for my 12 years as president was to carry out the 23 resolutions of the Arnhem Seminar and to build and grow the New World Organization. To transition from ICC to IPC as soon as possible. But a problem from 1989 to 1982 with Teen Albertville, France, and Barcelona, Spain. The nations at the Düsseldorf Assembly agreed that the current IC President Pro Tems would sit until those two Paralympic Games were complete. But in the interim, the IPC would be granted full membership status within the ICC as the transition took place. Unfortunately, ICC members resisted every motion at our combined meetings, and with our continued territorial overprotection to hold on to their own identity and power, it became difficult to accept a signed agreement. During my 12 years as the founding president, I had to develop close relationships with the International Olympic Committee, as well as its president, Juan Antonio Samaranch. I developed a close relationship with the president by establishing regular meetings. We received formal recognition from the IOC very soon after my election in Düsseldorf in 1989. The IOC also supported our organization financially. We did have a logo conflict because it was felt that our logo was too similar to the Olympic logo and it may cause confusion. I was included in many IOC commissions and special projects, and I was actually elected as an IOC member in the year 2000 in Sydney. And the very first Memorandum of Understanding was signed in Sydney in 2000 between the president of the IOC and myself. This had to be one of our greatest achievements in the history of the Paralympic movement. Growth and change did take place within the International Paralympic Committee during my years as president. The new constitution and bylaws were approved within a year in 1990 at the IPC General Assembly in Groningen, the Netherlands. National membership increased rapidly from 42 nations at the General Assembly in Düsseldorf to more than 150 the conclusion of my presidency. There was a great transition from sports being included into international federations. We developed a sport structure, not a medical or disability structure. And nationally, the nations were instructed and also encouraged to create national Paralympic committees, not 6 federations by disability. During my years as president, I was a volunteer president, was not paid for my services. In fact, I paid for all my own expenses during my 12-year tenure. We did have very modest IPC headquarters in Bruges, Belgium, where our elected Secretary General managed to hire one part-time executive assistant who also lived in Bruges. And we continued to work through those 12 years to develop television and corporate sponsorship in order to support our new organization. But at the time, the support from these sources was minimal. We also had a few challenging social and growth issues during my 12 years as president. First of all, integration and inclusion. We had to break down barriers, not only physical, but psychological barriers that existed because of attitudes of people in the community. And therefore, we created a committee called CIAD, Committee on the Inclusion of Athletes with a Disability. Next, we signed a number of contracts with host organizing committees, media, and other sponsors, which further helped our financial situation. The INUS-FMH, the International Sport for Mental Handicap, was involved with IPC, but only demonstration events at the Paralympics, even though they had membership on the IPC board. The International Deaf Sport Organization was a member of our board as well, and I was so pleased with Jerry Jordan and the support I received from him and his organization. But unfortunately, CIS left IPC in 1995 with our blessings and the blessing and support of IOC. We developed a very sophisticated drug testing protocol during the first 12 years of my presidency, and yet we experienced a very serious cheating problem at the 2000 Sydney Paralympic Games, in which some of the athletes with a mental handicap indicated that they were not mentally handicapped at all, and therefore we had to expel the INUS-FMH as an organization until we could see how they could work themselves back into the organization with a proper structure and governance. During my time as tenure as president, we also created a conference known as Vista 93. It was established and it grew over the years. I wanted to have a conference that included athletes, coaches, researchers, and sport leaders. In fact, at the first Vista 93, all of the talks and papers were recorded and published in 2 books and are used to this very day. Slide number 11. New Headquarters Bonn, 1999. This is our 4th major milestone in our recent history. Because of our rapid growth and need for more support for our nations, a new organization was required. In 1995, we held a worldwide competition to select a country and a city to be the host of our future headquarters. We received more than 11 applications for these headquarters, and they were visited by a selection committee. And then in 1997, at the General Assembly in Sydney, Australia, Bonn was selected as the new headquarters for IPC. Mayor Barbel Diekman has to be congratulated for her outstanding commitment to make sure that this would work both for the city of Bonn as well as the International Paralympic Committee. The property was donated to our organization. It was located in the highest profile district of Bonn on Adenauerli, which is Museum Road. And it happened for one reason, because the capital of Germany, which was Bonn at the time, moved to Berlin. So it opened up opportunities for more facilities for us to move into. And in 1999, we held the official opening of the IPC headquarters in Bonn, Germany. We went from a staff of 1 part-time person to 5 full-time. And today, the International Paralympic Committee has approximately 140 full-time staff. Slide number 12. The future, 2025 and beyond. Over my many years as a professor and as an advocate, I became faithful to the goal of achieving universal awareness and improvement of life for people living with a disability. Over time, this goal expanded to my international world of sport and the aspirations of Paralympians everywhere whose dreams were obscured by the cloud of unequal recognition. So, we got to work on our aims, ambitions, challenges, and opportunities. I like to think we were the instruments of change. We revolutionized the status quo, and we crushed the barriers. Amid our unyielding and unbreakable efforts for the future, we can confidently claim that we change the world of sport forever. Although these roads are long and challenging, our journey continues, and it gives me indescribable honor to continue that journey. In doing so, we need to consider our future challenges and opportunities if we are to maintain our position in the international world of sport and to grow our product. And this slide, certainly the slide number 12, certainly illustrates the 24 opportunities and challenges that we have, including safe sport, social change, women in sport, technical changes, gender equality, functional classification, sporting transitioning out of IPC, education and awareness, mental health, facility design, academic research. We live in a digital age. Solidarity, high performance or high support needs for more severely disabled individual athletes, and the future of the IOC agreement. Are we benefiting? We live in a changing world. We've got to develop relationships and partnerships. We need to have an evolution, not a revolution. I appreciate and recognize there is only so much the IPC and the Paralympics can do with their limited resources, within their vision, mission, and long-term strategy, but we need action, not words, or we will stand to be considered in the future the poor second cousins to the Olympics. Slide number 13. My hope. I would like to leave you with comments on 5 opportunities that to me are so vital to the future of our movement. The first one deals with fighting mental health. COVID had an impact around the world, and 1 in 5 athletes experience mental health problems, according to world authorities in sport medicine and sports psychology. And by the age of 40, 50% of our athletes will have experienced mental health issues. It's not immune if athletes is talented or successful, and overload and stress are the biggest problems, and everyone is vulnerable. Mental Timeout program was created by Tennis Canada. The purpose is simply to champion positive tennis experiences and commitment to ensure safe, healthy, and supportive environment for all sports. This project is supported with the cooperation of both the top Paralympic and Olympic tennis players in Canada, a truly integrated and inclusive program. Dr. Rob Shaw, a psychologist and Paralympic tennis players, says, "You may think my low points have come after big losses, but they had nothing to do with tennis." End quote. Mental Timeout encourages all athletes to have a support system early in their career with and through the help of friends and professionals. My second concern is creating a safe sport environment. We need to protect our female athletes and our youth. They are experiencing physical, psychological, and emotional abuse. We need to be creating more opportunities, equity, equality, and fairness for our youth and female athletes. We need to be concerned about their dignity. We need to evaluate policies and issues such as transgendered athletes. On March the 8th, each year, we celebrate International Women's Day. The awards, which have been running since 2013, recognize women in the Paralympic movement who inspire and evaluate the Paralympic ideals and who serve as positive role models. Zakia Kudadadi said, Thank you for choosing me as emerging leader for the International Paralympic International Women's Day Recognition Award 2025. This is a great honor for me and the women of Afghanistan. I am very happy and everyone feels like a dream. But it is indeed a reality. Afghan women stand bravely against oppression, demanding freedom, not as a wish, but as an undeniable right. Their voices cannot be silenced as they come from the hearts that beat for a brighter tomorrow. End quote. You now know the impact that International Women's Day and safe sport can have on women such as Zakia. The third area in my hope is adapting to the changing world. We need to keep up. We are living in a digital age. We are living in and around artificial intelligence. We need to be aware of equipment upgrades, what research and design is going into upgrading our equipment. And even beyond that, facility design and accessibility. We need to go beyond what is the code that's responsible for facility design. New sports are evolving in the world today, such as esports. And perhaps we need to consider more head-to-head sports in such areas as alpine sport competitions and leave some of the more traditional ones behind. And because we live in a changing world, in a digital age, we need to leverage media exposure. We need to have mentorship. Our athletes need to have other athletes in which they can mentor. Our president's profile at the IPC has to be much, much higher. Media profile. I receive daily media report from Sports In and Inside the Games, and where I notice 20 to 30 articles a day on Olympic and international sports. I rarely see more than one Paralympic article a week covering Paralympic sports. And we must ensure that our sports are covered between the games, which includes world and regional championships. The IPC's development program was created in 2024, and they were present in 133 countries, and it benefited nearly 37,000 people and contributed towards a record number of athletes and national Paralympic committees competing at the Paris 2024 Paralympic Games. Thanks to the development programs, 7,400 para-athletes were supported on the athlete pathway through talent identification, competition opportunities, and access to mentors, coaches, and classifiers. In addition to the support of the athletes, 5,400 people were trained as sport Paralympic leaders, dedicated to laying the groundwork for para-sport development and developing pathways for para-athletes to survive and to thrive in the future. Our fourth hope for the future is academic research and education. We need to involve more universities around the world to do more research to ensure that our athletes are getting the answers to the questions they have so that they can achieve their dreams and goals. More conferences need to work together, such as VISTA, ISAPA, UNESCO, and the like. More research is needed in functional classification. Equipment and research design needs to be researched more thoroughly. And it needs to be a fact-based approach, not ideology. In our schools around the world, education and awareness is essential. We need to be part of the curriculum of schools in our elementary and junior and senior high schools so that the children of the world become more educated and awareness of people living with a disability and the Paralympic movement. Our conferences need to be integrated, not segregated. A couple of examples is the Paralympic Academy in Jamaica. The Paralympic Academy in Jamaica is the hub of the Caribbean. It's designed for parasport development. It has a 5-year grassroots development plan. They focus on policy, educational frameworks, and the creation of a physical training and educational center. Their priorities are to increase accessibility, promote inclusion and diversity. They want to promote a priority of community-based partnerships, and they want to have a public campaign to strengthen the values and principles of Paralympism. The second one of the academic research and education challenge is the IPC Membership Engagement Committee. James Chutsi, the Malawi NPC president, is chairing a new IPC advisory board whose role is to provide strategic guidance to the IPC board in its efforts to improve relations with its members, identify common challenges and opportunities, and consolidate more effective channels of communication across the global Paralympic structure. Strengthening inclusive structures and encouraging open, constructive dialogue is the key to real participation and lasting impact, says James. In the past, James spearheaded educational initiatives such as the integration Paralympic content into school curriculum and the implementation of the IPC's I'm Possible program, while playing a central role in campaigns aimed at reducing the stigma of disability. Throughout my journey, I've witnessed the power of sport to challenge stigma and change perception of disability, especially when local voices are elevated and true collaboration is encouraged, added James Chayutsi. President Andrew Parsons praised the diverse background of the new committee and its potential to strengthen institutional ties. Andrew said that increasing engagement with our members and ensuring we are delivering the right services to help them grow is a top priority for the IPC. He said this committee brings together a wealth of experience that will be extremely valuable to our board. The last hope for the IPC is inclusion and social justice. How can connections with international leadership in politics, sport governance, and business facilitate further discussions for greater inclusion and social justice? On February the 2nd and 3rd of this past year, Pope Francis hosted a World Leaders Summit at the Vatican on rights of the child. It was who's who in the world to talk about the rights of the child. IOC President Thomas Bach was invited and presented an excellent speech on the power of sport. Bach said that sport is health, sport is inclusion, sport is respect, sport is empowerment, sport is solidarity, and sport is peace. But where was our IPC president? He should have been included in this worldwide summit of world leaders in sport, but he was not there, which was very disappointing. More recently, though, speaking at the Global Disabilities Summit in Berlin in this past May, President Parsons emphasized the transformative power of parasport and its role in promoting greater inclusion for the world's 1.3 billion persons with disability. He also reaffirmed the IPC's commitment to supporting the development of 150 countries by 2029 and creating more opportunities for people with disabilities. Andrew said, "At the IPC, we envision a future whereby every person with a disability has an opportunity to engage in Paralympic sport in whatever way they wish, whether recreationally or competitively. To achieve this, we need accessible infrastructure and equipment that makes sport possible." He further went on to say, "Access to parasport leads to greater inclusion across all sectors. Sport reduces the stigma and discrimination associated with disability. It empowers individuals, transforms attitudes, drives mobility, and leads to inclusive communities, better employment, health outcomes, and stronger economies." And he continued on by saying, "In my view, alongside government legislation and policy, access to and participation in sport for persons with a disability can initiate tremendous social change. Parasport can be the launching pad for transformational change and a more inclusive world for all. But this cannot happen without accessible infrastructure." This was a fabulous message given by Andrew Parsons, the president of the International Paralympic Committee, and a good place to end this lecture of the G. Lawrence Rarick Memorial Lecture. And I hope that in the future that the message here given by our IPC president gives him an opportunity to be engaged in more high-profile and integrated events, because the event at the Global Disability Summit in Berlin was once again a segregated event. And I leave you with this, my dear friends and colleagues. How can you, from outside the movement, now inside it, drive change in the future? Slide 14. Thank you very much. Just a note here to let you know that some of you may not have understand a number of the small letters that I was using, ICC, IPC, and the like. At the end of the PowerPoint presentation is a list of glossary of terms for your information. Thank you, everyone. Goodbye and good night.